me, whatever. Okay, it's good to be with this group. It's the kind of group that comes out on a night like this, which either means we're all very committed and hardworking or a little nuts, but it's good to see you all here. I want to begin with two recent pieces. One, Paul Krugman, who I must say is about all we have in the mainstream media, beginning to get us halfway there. And I want to begin with the halfway he gets us and then say a bit more. That last week, you maybe saw the column he did on the division in American politics, in which he said something, I liked the column. My wife said, everybody knows that, stupid. And so you all may know it, but I think it's a crucial place to start. And that is, one side of American politics considers the modern welfare state a private enterprise economy, but one in which society's winners are taxed to pay for the social safety net, morally superior to the capitalism red of tooth and claw we had before the New Deal. It's only right, this side believes, for the affluent to help the less fortunate. Your basic social democratic, New Deal, progressive program. The other side believes people have a right to keep what they earn, and that taxing them to support others, no matter how needy, amounts to theft. That's what lies behind the modern right's fondness for violent rhetoric. Many activists on the right really do see taxes and regulation as tyranny, tyrannical impositions on their liberty, and there's no middle ground between this progressive social democratic position and sort of Margaret Thatcher, there is no such thing as society, only individuals. And that the Republican Party is now basically a Tea Party where Nixon, who I grew up thinking he was the worst possible thing that could happen to America. I'm not sure that wasn't right up to then. But, OSHA got passed, EPA got passed, Nixon proposed a negative income tax to help give people a basic standard of living. It was low, we didn't like it, it wasn't enough, but the thinking was of the kind Krugman's talking about. It was a bipartisan, centrist, you do what you need to do to foster capital accumulation, but legitimation is important. You have to sort of keep the suckers happy in the system and all that. And within that, basic progress was made, important working class victories were won, and so on. Now, the question is, what changed? Because this didn't happen by itself. And what happened were a number of things, globalization being, in my view, the most important, because it meant the working classes of France, of Italy, of Germany, of the United States were now thrown into a single labor market where the lessons we learned in the 1930s, where you had to organize the whole industry, you had to organize all the workers of a trade, and then all could come up together in that form of solidarity and unity. There was class power and class strength for the trade union movement. With globalization, we're now faced with a vast increase in the size of the global labor force. The former communist countries, which are now part of the capitalist world market, India opening up, the global labor force has, the minimum estimates are that it doubled, the higher estimates are that it tripled. Where in many ways we are now in a single labor market with some exceptions, which I'll get to. But the point is, for most workers, they're competing against workers in very distant places who speak different languages, but who work basically for the same transnational corporations or subcontractors for those. Well, that was a tremendous difference. And what you had coming out of the New Deal was an alliance between transnational capital and labor, the progressive New Deal elements of the capitalist class and the trade union movement, against national capital, those capitalists who just did business in the United States, who were not willing to accept unions under any circumstances, and the transnational corporations that wanted, they were highly capital intensive, labor was able to organize the huge factories of Detroit and Chicago and so on, and steel and auto led the way, and you all know that. All right, now we have plants in Brazil, in Korea, all over the place producing basically the same basic things, tremendously weakening the power of labor. Second, which we tend to underestimate, is technology. That if you go into a steel mill, there are no people anymore. You know, anybody who has a 1930s view of a steel mill should visit. You go in and you're on this catwalk, and there are like 3 football stadiums, and way at the end there's this guy and that guy. Nobody goes near the blast furnace because they're huge and you'd be burned to a cinder. Even 3 football fields away, the heat is just incredible. But nobody's there. There are no steel workers. And all of this is, there are people, but the efficiency of a modern auto plant or a modern steel plant has changed the dynamics so that fewer workers are now producing more things. This is true of washing machines and everything else. Okay, so the weakness of labor from technological change and a failure to re-employ workers who've had good jobs in other good jobs or good paying jobs. I mean, there's nothing good about working in an auto plant, or these are really terribly hard jobs. If you know people who've worked there, or if you've toured the plants, you know, jump in and out of a car every 40 seconds to install something and jump out all day long is not fun. So it's not a good job, but it's a good paying job. It's a paying job with security, with health care, and so on. All right, so the context of people saying, well, we need jobs, is a context in which capital's view of the United States has changed. And that is the second point I want to make. I want to read to you from a equity guy, and this is from an article that was in the Atlantic, and I'm blocking on her name, Freeland. She's a woman who works for the she's the U.S. editor for the Financial Times, has an article in the current Atlantic, and she quotes this hedge fund guy. A person in Africa who runs a big African bank and went to Harvard might have more in common with me than he does with his neighbors. And I could well share more overlapping concerns and experiences with him than with my neighbors. The circle we move in, he explained, are defined by, quote, interests and activities rather than geography. Beijing has a lot in common with New York, London, or Mumbai. You see the same people. You eat in the same restaurants. You stay in the same hotels. But most important, we are engaged as global citizens in cross-cutting commercial, political, social matters of common concern. We are much less place-based than we used to be. That is, we're seeing a global capitalist class formation in place of isolated national capitalist class, where the billionaire in Mumbai has more in common with the billionaire in Beijing than he does with his neighbor on the street in Mumbai. So as the global capitalist class built, they said you had to sit next to me.
Oh, good. Is that guaranteeing I'm staying awake? Is that?
They said, well, I shouldn't tell them, right? They love you, don't they?
All right, what's not to love?
So much to love.
then there's that.
Okay, so the globalization of production and the transformation from national classes to global classes changes the terrain in ways that are not good for us, obviously. We have Mr. Obama, and I'm going to say very little about him, only to say that the anti-Obama angst on the part of those capitalists, those Wall Street folks, who were saved by Obama, right? Who trillions of dollars were given to put their banks back in shape, bought their toxic assets, lent them all the money they wanted at zero interest. Now, Obama is anti-business when he tries to pass any kind of modest regulation of banks, any kind of, they might pay taxes for a change, anything that they might think about creating jobs for American workers. He is anti-business. So we have a situation where to go back to the quote from, or the passage I read you from Krugman, it's a three-way struggle. It is a struggle between the Republicans, the Tea Party, the hard right, and then not a Democratic Party, but, of course, the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, and the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. That when William Daley was appointed last week to be Mr. Obama's chief of staff, the guy that is the gatekeeper for anybody who wants to give any ideas, or Mr. Daley, you know who he is, great working class family. I met some of them in '68 when I was in Chicago. He was the vice chairman of J.P. Morgan Chase just before taking the job with Obama. He was against the financial regulation bill. He was against health care reform bill. This is who Obama put in there because Obama cannot win re-election without the money that he had in 2008. And we have now seen huge amounts of money turning against Obama. Not because he was a socialist, as the Tea Party says, but because he wanted to rebuild America, his infrastructure projects, his job construction, the kind of stuff that during the campaign sounded good to a lot of us. His awareness of the environmental is real. All of this, you don't hear that anymore because realistically, none of that is possible. It's not possible for a lot of reasons. One is the Democrats themselves in the Senate refuse to change the rules that allow a minority Republican to prevent anything from happening. They could change that the first day of a new Senate if they wanted to, but they don't, because their strategy for a long time was to get money out of the rest of us so they could get 61 votes and pass legislation. They were not interested in changing the rules because it's a great money-making thing. Nor were they interested in changing the tax system. I just finished a book on financialization, which is an academic book, but people here, I think, might find it. I'm not trying to push the book, but one of the things, Schumer, and of course Hillary Clinton when she was our senator and now our new senator, represent Wall Street. That's what they do. They get more money from Wall Street than other senators because they have a job to do. Schumer, every season, talks about taxing the hedge fund people. They get their income in what's called carried interest. Anybody know carried interest? It's 15% tax rate. And they take their income as what they made up, calling it carried interest. It's regular income. It should be taxed as regular income. But since they're hedge fund and private equity groups, they say, well, yeah, but we're making it in capital gains, so it should be, it's carried in. It's not interest, it's not carried. But they have paid off and gotten this. Schumer shakes them down and has raised more money for the Democratic Party than anybody else ever has out of Wall Street by just saying we're going to have to tax it, but maybe I can keep it off a year or two, and he keeps doing this. All this stuff, yeah. All right, so we have the corporate Democrats, we have us, and then we have the right wing. And the problem is that I don't, in a sense, have to tell people in this room about class and class struggle. The political system does not accept there is such a thing as class or class struggle. And the Democratic Party looks to win elections, which means the labor will knock on doors but get nothing when they're elected. So when we talk about jobs, when we talk about job creation, it is in this larger context.